Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight we are going to talk about the recent Supreme Court ruling, or not ruling, recent Supreme Court decision to start looking at the Texas lawsuit. And I think it's incredibly interesting to see how this is taking form, but we'll give people a little time to stroll in. I am attempting to get back to doing more streaming, both of the pre-recorded and the live variety. I don't know, how much longer this is going to be viable on YouTube. As you know, YouTube has announced its new restrictions, and so it'll be interesting to see at what point they decide to give me an excuse to see what the European courts think of their idea that they can do anything they want without being held accountable. Now, as you know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but I do happen to be privy to some of the finest legal talent around the world. And when I say around the world, I mean that very literally. And so it's always interesting to have conversations with some of these guys behind the scenes, and to get the benefit of their analyses of everything from the the Mark Zaid versus Mark Zaid tortious interference lawsuit down, I think, in Texas, the Patreon situation, some other situations that are perhaps a little less familiar to you, all the way up to these Supreme Court matters. As you know, I occasionally publish some of the emails that I get. You've seen analyses of the Georgia court filings, or the Georgia lawsuit filings, and you'll probably see some of the Supreme Court stuff coming up and being posted on the blog in the reasonably near future. But the point being that I am modestly educated on some of these things, and so I can perhaps help put some of the issues into perspective that you might otherwise not get from the mainstream media. Thank you, Legionnaire Bear. Very generous. Are you expecting to be banned from Blogger? I'm not expecting to be, but of course we're always prepared, and we have been prepared for, I don't know, 9 years, 8 years. The reason that I don't think that it has happened, despite Google's obvious attitude towards me, as you may or may not know, it came out in the James Damore lawsuit that I'm actually banned from physically setting foot on the Mountain View campus. And then there's a lot more that we could go into, but the point is that they just got fined $100 million, another $100 million by a European court yesterday, if I recall correctly. And the California superior courts and the district courts are much, much more favorable to Google than any of the European courts are. In fact, they tend to be very hostile to large American tech companies accustomed to throwing their weight around. And so I suspect that it is Google's desire to not make me extremely wealthy that prevents them from deciding to take on the Legion in hostile territory. But you never know. Certainly we've seen again and again and again people making decisions that are obviously suboptimal. And so you never know, especially when you've got a organization like Google, where until recently the head of their legal department made a habit of chasing his subordinates around the office and getting several of them, or at least one of them, possibly even two, getting them pregnant. So that's not the sort of legal team that is intimidating in the least. Now, I want to make it clear that I don't believe that the fate of the presidency hangs on this particular Supreme Court. I don't think that there is a I don't think there's any question that the president is giving the court the opportunity to do the right thing. You know, he's given the state legislatures the opportunity to do that. They have not, for the most part, come through. And now it's time to give the Supreme Court their opportunity to do the right thing. If they do, that's great. If they don't, I don't think that that's going to be much of a problem. It's very common in these sorts of conflicts for one side to refuse to believe that the other side will avail itself of the options that it has. We see that all the time. You know, there's stuff that I can't talk about right now with regards to some of the ongoing conflicts, and it's very, very clear that Patreon never, ever expected to be held accountable. It didn't expect the bears to stand firm when they were sued. And there's some other issues that I'm sure that some of you are well aware of. And they were not expecting people to stand firm in that regard either. And you know, it's very clear that the media, the state legislatures, the court, you know, the lower and the district court judges, they don't expect anything from President Trump except that he will bow to the media pressure and eventually give in. Now, what's really fascinating about this, and we're going to get more into this, and I think what we're seeing with regards to the massive media pressure, the unanimous media speaking as a single voice, and then seeing things come out with regards to the Chinese involvement and the extent of the Chinese involvement. I think this is all related to a book that was written 20 years ago by two colonels in the Chinese army. It's a brilliant book, great book. I absolutely recommend it. I highly wish that I had read it 10 years ago. It's called Unrestricted Warfare, and it's got a very histrionic and frankly ridiculous subtitle that I don't think it justifies. But if you read it, what it is an explication of what can genuinely be called 5GW, fifth generation warfare. A lot of people who follow this kind of stuff, they love to come up with different concepts and say, is this 5GW? Is this 5GW? And it's always ridiculous. But if we consider that 4GW is war by non-state actors, I think that 5GW is actually a reasonable appellation for what these two Chinese army colonels describe as, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. I would call it comprehensive warfare. And what they mean by that is that the objectives that were usually pursued by violent military means are pursued by state actors using means and methods that are not normally considered to be military methods. And they talk specifically, in fact, I want to highlight that quote, or read this quote that is directly relevant to this, because it really struck me. In fact, this is going to go on the blog in the next day or three. But and thank you, Carolina Swamp Fox. It's very kind. So they're talking about the impact of the media on the end of the Gulf War. It says, the effects of the media have always been a two-edged sword. This means that while it is directed at the enemy, at the same time on another front, it can be similarly a sharp sword directed at oneself. Based on information that was disclosed following the war, the reason that the ground war abruptly came to a halt after 100 hours was actually because President Bush, influenced by a hasty assessment of the course of the war that was issued on television by a battlefield news release officer, later came to a similarly hasty decision of his own, dramatically shortening the time from strategic decision-making to concluding the war. This is why Saddam escaped death initially, and why it took much longer to resolve things later. The impact of the media on warfare is becoming increasingly widespread and increasingly direct, to the point where even major decisions by the president of a superpower involving the cessation of hostilities are to a very great extent rooted in the reaction to a single television program. From this, one can perceive a bit of the significance that the media carries in social life today. And so what that means, what they're saying, is that the media is now a part of making war. That the media can be used to force the enemy to serve your own interests. Now remember, this is something that was written 20 years ago by a pair of Chinese strategists. And so if you put those three things together, then it becomes readily apparent that there is behind, if you look behind the relationship between the media, the Chinese government pursuing its own interests, and the strategic conception of how war is now waged in a battle space that is non-violent and non-military, you begin to understand what is happening today. And this probably permeates the legislatures, the courts, and so forth. So what we're seeing here is not necessarily just civil war by other means, but we're also seeing international war by other means. Anaf Habib says, it's a win-win either way. If the court cucks, the Insurrection Act can be invoked with just cause. If they don't, the president wins the contingent election once the electors get disqualified. It does tend to look that way. But here's what I mean when we're talking about the Civil War by other means. This is what we're talking about right here. The 4 states that have their elections and their election processes being questioned by Texas are Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. They're all in blue. And Texas has filed the lawsuit. They're the plaintiff. They've been joined as the plaintiff by several other states. The rest of them have merely filed amicus briefs, which are legal representations in support of what Texas is saying. Now, the gray states are those that have filed amicus briefs in favor of these 4 states. Wisconsin, they've filed them in favor of one or more of them. And then the yellow states, Alaska, Idaho, Wyoming, Iowa, Kentucky, and New Hampshire, have all refused to pick a side. I saw a letter from one attorney general's office. I believe it was either Wyoming or Iowa, I can't remember which, where they said that they were not going to support the amicus brief. They're not going to file an amicus brief in favor of Texas, but it doesn't look like they're interested in taking sides at all. So, and then of course, people have noted that there have also been some filings from legislators in Pennsylvania and in Georgia, but here we're just talking about the state attorney generals themselves. So anyhow, that's if you look at the strategic concept of comprehensive war, or I really need to I would tell you what the book calls it, but they use like 15 different names for it, and I haven't finished it yet, so I don't know if the entire thing has been labeled by them in a meaningful way. But let's just for the sake of argument, and this will I assure you cause some arguments on the blog, let's just call it 5GW for now. And I, like I said, I do think that that's actually a legitimate description of what we're talking about here. From a 5GW perspective, this is a civil war being waged initially at the Supreme Court, and it is already being waged through the media. It's already being waged through the lower courts. And so this is part of the process that is leading towards 2033. This is the part of the process that is leading towards the breakup of the political entity known as the United States of America. If you've been watching my streams or reading my books that are actually my one book that's related to this, then you know that I've been expecting the breakup of the empire since, I don't know, at least 2004. And we hope, we pray that breakup will be a peaceful one. It would be wonderful if it was, but it could also be something that is incredibly ugly. And the fact that the United States is such a major player, still the preeminent world power, if no longer the monopolar superpower, there are tremendous international interests that are interested in interfering. And so it's going to be really fascinating to see how this plays out. You know, we do live in interesting times, and so we'll have to just wait and see how it plays out. You know, we're just small minnows hoping not to get thrashed by the whale flukes, but there's nothing, there's nothing that we can do about it other than hope to understand it and perhaps do our part, whether it's voting for voting for Trump, voting for the House, and so forth. Those things are important, but we need to understand that these events are going to play out without much in the way of our participation or approval. Ukrainian Bear says, thank you for all you have and continue to do. A lowly consumer advocate. Indeed. Just advocating for consumers. May your story be told throughout the realm. You've had a significant impact on my ability to discern the spiritual world. May God keep your family. I appreciate that. I think that as most of you are at least beginning to recognize, this is underneath the ideological war, underneath the tribal war, underneath the international war. This is also a spiritual war. It's part of the conflict that never ends. And my wife and I watched through the entirety of the Buffy and Angel series over the past year, and we just watched the final Angel episode last night. And like all Joss Whedon shows, it's got its moments and it's got its weaknesses and stuff. But it was the one thing that was very, I would say, even inspirational and inspired about it is the way that the lead character recognizes that the war will go on beyond him. He recognizes that they're just there for a moment, and that the wolf, the ram, and the hart have been since the beginning and will continue to be around afterwards. But that doesn't take away the significance and the importance of his choice. And that's something that you should always keep in mind, which is that even if your choice appears to be petty and insignificant, and even if you think that it's not going to have any impact on the wider world at all, it's still your choice. And that is the significance. When you choose to take your side, or whether you allow your side to be chosen for you by refusing to choose it, that is a significant act in and of itself. Whether that choice becomes significant through your subsequent actions is something that you can't possibly know, so don't worry about it. Make the choice on the basis of what you believe to be right. Make the choice on the basis of what you believe to be good and true. And then let that determine your actions. Carlos Bianco asks, Fox, do you think that if the Supreme Court recognizes Trump as the winner, the powers that be, media, Amazon, etc., will disregard the decision outright? No, I don't believe they can. I don't believe that they are prepared to walk away from the legal structure that they depend so greatly upon. And we'll have to see. But but there's no way that I think that they can afford to just turn away from it. I'm going to go here now to the blog, because I'm going to read that first bit of the Pennsylvania response. This is the response from the Pennsylvania AG, and I'm going to read it to you. And it's very amusing, I think, because it's, I've been reading a reasonable amount of legal nonsense over the past 3 years, and this is practically textbook confession that they don't have a case. So this is the summary. Texas seeks to invalidate election in 4 states for yielding results with which it disagrees. Okay, so right there is the first lie. You always know the other side's case is weak when they have to lie about what you're saying. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a narrative. And they're trying to create a false narrative. Its request for this court to exercise its original jurisdiction and then anoint Texas's preferred candidate for president is legally indefensible and is an affront to principles of constitutional democracy. Okay, there's two more lies, plus they misspelled the word affront, which is amusing. Texas is not asking the court to anoint Donald Trump. They're asking the court to hold those 4 states' election processes accountable to the rules that they were supposed to follow and did not. And then furthermore, the principles of constitutional democracy are irrelevant to the United States because the United States is not a democracy. It's a republic. What Texas is doing in this proceeding is to ask this court to reconsider a mass of baseless claims about problems with the election that have already been considered and rejected by this court and other courts. Again, not true. Totally not true. Which of these claims have been filed with the court already? Which of these claims did Texas file? Indeed, the very type of claim that Texas is filing couldn't have been filed by any of the other parties. It attempts to exploit this court's sparingly used original jurisdiction to relitigate these matters. Again, it's not relitigating them. And furthermore, whether the court's original jurisdiction is sparingly used or not is irrelevant. And again, what they're referring to with original jurisdiction is the fact that the main reason the Supreme Court exists is to settle disputes between the states. A district court in Texas, a local judge in Pennsylvania is not able to address these issues. But Texas obviously lacks standing to bring such claims. Really? A sovereign state lacks standing to bring these claims before the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court exists to resolve disputes between the states? Doesn't make sense. Which in any event are barred by latches and are moot, meritless, and dangerous. I mean, he might have well have just said radioactive, evil, and scary. This is all about narrative. This is not meaningful. Texas has not suffered harm simply because it dislikes the result of the election. Well, Texas isn't claiming that it suffered harm because it doesn't like the result of the election. It's stating that the votes of its voters were harmed because the other states didn't apply the correct legal and constitutional processes, which is obviously true. And nothing in the text, history, or structure of the Constitution supports Texas' view that it can dictate the manner in which the other 4 states run their elections. Again, this is false. Texas isn't dictating the manner. The manner is already dictated by the U.S. Constitution, by the Supreme Court, and by the constitutional law. Nor is that view grounded in any precedent from this court. That's true, because the situation hasn't arisen before. Texas does not seek to have the court interpret the Constitution so much as disregard it. That's just complete nonsense. The cascading series of compounding defects in Texas's filings is only underscored by the surreal alternate reality that those filings attempt to construct. What's interesting here is, one of the weaknesses of evil is that they often tell you what they're doing and what they're trying to do. And creating a surreal alternate reality is exactly what the left, what the media, what the academics, what all the people involved in this election have attempted to construct. And so that's an admission of what they've done. That alternate reality includes an absurd statistical analysis positing that the probability of President-elect Biden winning the election was 1 in a quadrillion. I can't speak to that particular statistical analysis. Maybe it's absurd, maybe it isn't. I haven't looked at it. But just calling it absurd without offering any correction is a little strange. Bill of complaint at 6. Texas' effort to get this court to pick the next president has no basis in law or fact. Well, actually, that statement has no basis in fact or the Texas filing. Court should not abide this seditious abuse, interesting choice of words, huh? Sedition, of the judicial process, and should send a clear and unmistakable signal that such abuse must never be replicated. Well, absolutely. I mean, if the Texas filing is a seditious abuse of the judicial process, then it should be shut down and thrown out. No question. However, it doesn't appear to actually be the case. It doesn't actually appear to be relevant. As I said on the blog, that is the legal equivalent of "ree." There's really very little there. And so, they are building a straw man because for whatever reason, they don't wish to take on the Texas claims directly. And so, that's what's happening. And so that is probably a very good sign for the Texas case, in my experience and in my opinion, because if there was a more substantive, calmer, less manipulative response from the attorneys representing Philadelphia, I would take it more seriously. But when you see that sort of stuff, you immediately know that there's going to be plenty of weaknesses, plenty of irrelevancies. You just have to look. And so, we'll see how it goes. So let's see here. Anyhow, that's my analysis of the Supreme Court situation. I don't, I haven't read all of the documents. How strong the Texas case is, I don't know, but I do strongly suspect, on the basis of the Pennsylvania response, that the Texas case is probably stronger than the 4 states believe they can deal with. They don't seem to feel that they have a strong case against it. Vox, do you think this Texas lawsuit was planned by Trump from the get-go, or do you think this is just a new secondary plan? I don't believe that this was part of his primary plan. I think that this was part of his preference for giving the judicial process the opportunity to resolve the situation in a peaceful manner. Trump is the great negotiator. He prefers people to be reasonable. He prefers everybody to understand the situation and make a reasonable accommodation with it. Whether that's going to happen, it could certainly, but I never assumed that. I've never had any trust in the courts. I didn't really have any trust in the legislatures, so I always assumed it was going to be the third plan. Let's see here. Zophiel sends $25. Thank you. What do you think about the CNN tapes and their morning lectures on the agenda of the day? I don't think that that's any surprise. I mean, I was in the media, in the newspapers, for I don't know how many years. What was it? Something like 1993 to 2001. So I was working in the mainstream media for 8 years. Granted, I was a lowly columnist, but I was a nationally syndicated columnist, and so I did have some communications with a number of different op-ed and other editor level people, and that's entirely normal. I mean, that's that's part of what the media does, is they say, okay, what narrative are we going to set? And it's the same thing that we saw in Gamergate, obviously, with the Game Journal pros. They would all agree upon what their narrative would be, and then they push it. That's why they use exactly the same language in the headlines. That's why you see, like right now, the global narrative that they're trying to push is build back better. It's not an accident. They settle upon that, and then they sell it just like an advertising campaign. Dr. Zume says, is evil smart, stupid, or some better adjective? I would say that evil is patient. I'm talking about the real evil. Human evil tends to be more clever and have animal cunning, but it tends to be rather short-sighted. Whenever you see longer-term evil, whether it's spanning decades or centuries, that's when you know that there's a spiritual element behind it, because there is some sort of intelligence behind it that is not subject to human lifetimes. Do you think other states will file lawsuits like Texas? No, I think that they will either join Texas as a plaintiff, or they'll file an amicus brief either supporting it or opposing it. There's no reason for any other states to file it, because if they did file it, it would just get drawn into it would get consolidated with the Texas case. So, build back what Q and the team have destroyed over the last 4 years. Well, I'm sure that's part of it. But the thing to remember is that we have an eternal connection too. I mean, what we are is intersections of eternity with, the material world. And so we're here for that period of time, that brief intersection. And then we're back to whatever the core reality is. And so, that's why it's not, I think that's why it's so easy for those who accept that, either in a philosophical or religious sense, to have both equanimity and hope in what is obviously a fallen world that's full of evil. So let's talk about some lighter topics right now. I'm going to have to do a whole stream when Shade comes out, because Chuck Dixon started writing Shade, and it's very cool, and it's kind of our answer to the SJW Batman. But the news that this fat lesbian SJW writer is now writing Batman was about the best possible news that I could think of for helping Shade come to the fore and eventually replace Batman. So, no more from Il Professore. I think he's done with the blog. Youssef says, thank you for being so active on the blog. That's my preferred medium. I do these videos because many people have encouraged me to do so, incentivized me to do so, and also, more importantly, come up with a compelling justification for doing so. We're living in a post-literate society, and I just have to accept that. And so, there we go. But, we can do certain things, like, for example, man, my throat is so dry. This was book 3 of the Castelia Library. It's really beautiful, and we're quite happy with how it turned out. But we've just announced that book 8 is going to be Heidi, and book 9 is going to be Rhetoric by Aristotle. So anyhow, we'll talk more about it in the future. I think I'm going to call it an end today because I need to get something to drink. But again, this will be interesting. Please visit the blog if you want to get more regular updates on what's going on and my thoughts about those sort of things. Real briefly, yes, we are going to. We've provisionally decided to proceed with the coffee company. What we're going to call it, we don't know, but we've already arranged for how delivery and stuff will take place in the States. And we're going to get real, genuine Italian coffee. We just need to work out what all the details are going to be. Well, there'll be more, I'll do a stream about that. We'll talk about that, and there'll be information on the blog. Something else I should announce, this is not part of the Castalia library or Libraria subscriptions, but this weekend we're going to send out invites to all Castalia Library and Libraria subscribers to Social Galactic, because we've just found that that's the best way to keep people informed. We've got Library Thing, I put stuff on the blog, but honestly we think that the best way to just keep everybody informed about what's shipping and that sort of thing is if everybody has access to it. So and then I on a final note, I really recommend that you subscribe to Unauthorized. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming, new additional content, new additional creators, and you know what's going on with YouTube. And so it's not just important, it's vital to have people actively supporting these alternative platforms, because once Section 30 gets revoked, and that could happen as soon as the end of January, things are going to get crazy. And so the stronger position and the more people that we have already on Unauthorized, and it's going really well. And keep in mind, if you join Unauthorized, you also get a free Social Galactic account. So anyhow, so that's what's going on. I think like over 60 people have joined Unauthorized in the last 24 hours. More and more of Razor Fists people are coming over, and so we're just gonna keep moving forward. So we'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Darkstream.